It's a pleasure to be here. First, I've spoken at a lot of conferences over my years, and I've never had the opportunity to sit on a sofa while I was doing it. So my first thought when I saw the setup was, what, no ottoman? The reason I got here was that during Hurricane Sandy, my own home was destroyed and lost, and so I had to go through the recovery process as an individual, my family, but also I had to manage it in my job. So it gave me an interesting perspective on things. And how I got here is that 2 years ago I attended this conference in Atlanta, and I was speaking to a HUD staff person and explained to her what had happened, and I'd mentioned to her, and I'll get to this in the slides, but I mentioned to her that I used a program called the 203K mortgage program, and she was excited about that because she said HUD had been talking about trying to promote that more, and so since then we've been going back and forth and communicating about that, so I'll get into that. So anyway, everyone knows where New Jersey is. But the map you're looking at, if you look at the kind of the top right, almost the top right portion of the map where there's a little peninsula sticking out, that entire area is Middletown Township. That peninsula is locally known as Sandy Hook. It's a part of Gateway National Recreation Area. It contains a former military base and an active Coast Guard station, as well as one of the major beach resort areas in the region. So Middletown's a large town, 42 square miles, 67,000 residents. But the area affected by Hurricane Sandy was that area you see right along the waterfront there, which is actually a bay. And there is a series of creeks and rivers and streams that enter into the community, and that's really where a lot of the damage occurred. And here you can see a kind of a blown up view of that, and these are four different neighborhoods, all of which have sort of a distinction. Middletown's an unusual town. It's a compilation of about 11 different sub-neighborhoods. They all have their own name. They all have their own elementary schools. They all have their own post offices and zip codes. So they're unique unto themselves, but they belong to a larger community. But the important part about this, of course, is that the area affected is probably only 10% of the community and probably 12 to 15% of the population. And again, to dispel a myth about people who live on the coast, these are not wealthy people. These are not neighborhoods of people who, this is a magnificent beach home with magnificent views. This is the lowest income neighborhoods in the region. Okay, it's very blue collar, very working class, people who struggle regularly to make ends meet. So this was a particular challenge for them to be faced with the losses that Sandy brought to them. So I just want to go through a couple of photos. You can see these are two small homes, kind of typical of the area. Not all are like this, but many. They're bungalows. And you can see what happens with an event like this is the damage almost looks like there was an explosion inside of the house, inside of the structure, because the pressure builds up and eventually something bursts. And when you go there, you see most of the stuff is not even close to the house. It's usually miles away by the time you get there. It's just another example. There's another one of these. I'm sure you've seen these photos of structures that almost look like they shouldn't still be standing, but somehow they are. It's another house that used to have a really nice front porch. The front porch is long gone. That's actually my house. And now I will say that was partially during demolition, so it didn't quite look that bad after the storm, but still, it was an awful mess and not salvageable. But it's important to note that the foundation was something I was able to retain, and that's important when we get to the 203K discussion. So, I'm not going to read this in detail, but and all this information is very easily available online. Just have to Google it. But the 203K program is designed for people to be able to repair, rehabilitate homes, and essentially build it into the cost of their mortgage and finance it that way. And what they've done is made the terms of this program pretty easy. And so it's useful for people who don't have a lot of means financially. As you can see, the 3.5% down payment is allowed. A credit score of 620, so it's not particularly demanding in terms of credit scores. They will allow you to put essentially 6 months of rent, if you will, allow you to pay 6 months of rent and not pay the mortgage for 6 months if you have to be displaced while the repairs are ongoing. It does work for condos and two-family houses. I don't have any experience with how that would work. And you can see that the loan-to-value ratio is particularly high because they base the financing terms on the post value. Okay, they assume a value. So it's a really good program, and what I would suggest to you, if you are not familiar with it, go back to your communities, and you really need to find real estate brokers who know this, because it's not something they all do. Now, mortgage brokers will, if you call someone on the phone and say, hey, do you know how to do the 203K program, I want to buy a house or do some repairs, they're going to say, yes, I know how to do it, and then they're going to get off the phone and look up how to do it. And it doesn't work that way. You really need, and the way I learned about it was shortly after Sandy, we were putting together a community resource forum. So to bring all sorts of experts in to help people in their recovery. And I got a phone call from a guy who was from way down in South Jersey, inland, not particularly affected area, and he said, he described the program to me, and so I said, that's great, and I invited him to the event, and he set up a table and explained it to me, and he explained that he does this program, but most don't. So I do believe that HUD is now working on some training programs for this to train mortgage brokers to know about how the program works. So this is a list of the items that are eligible, and it's almost anything you can think of in terms of what needs to be done to a home. And you can do this, like I said, you can refinance the home you're living in if it needs any of this work done, or you can use it to buy a home and do the repairs. The key one, of course, for this is the last one, which is elevation of structures, which is what was largely needed during the Sandy process. So there are some drawbacks to the program. One is, as I mentioned, it's very complicated from a paperwork and oversight standpoint. So that's why you need to get your residents in touch with somebody who really knows how to do the program, because it's laden with paperwork. They will also select for you a project manager. Now, this isn't a normal type of project manager that you would think would oversee a construction project. This is somebody who makes sure the work gets done and doles out the payments to the contractors. And this is one of the areas that's a little bit unique. The mortgage company pays the contractor as the work's ongoing. So one of the other sort of drawbacks to it is that the payment process is probably a little bit slower than most contractors would like. It works and they still get paid, but it's a little bit slower, so you have to have somebody who understands and is willing to work with you on that. And the program rules that the 203K program has might not blend with whatever program your state sets up. If you have a disaster and your state sets up some sort of a funding or assistance program, sometimes the rules don't mesh. And an example in my case was that the state set up a program where you could apply for money to do certain work on your home, and they wanted to see copies of the checks that you sent to or paid to your contractor. Well, I didn't send any checks to pay my contractor. They were all done by the mortgage program. When I first talked to the state about that, they were like, I don't know how we're going to deal with that. But the good news is it took them a day or two, and they realized that it could still work. And so it was resolved. But you just got to make sure that the program rules for other assistance programs mesh with the 203K program. So I just put this together. It's just kind of a summary of how things, the components to rebuilding. So your flood insurance is whatever your determined your damages were. Again, keep in mind that they depreciate things. So, if you have an HVAC system and a heating system in a house that's 10 years old, you get the value of that as a 10-year-old facility, not necessarily replacement value. ICC, we know that's $30,000. Good news you heard yesterday, $40,000. Not a big help in New Jersey. In my case, it was $42,500 because I demolished my house, and all I had to do was extend my foundation up. So, but the average house lift right now in New Jersey is $110,000. So even with $40,000, that's still a heavy lift for most people, and certainly people in the areas that we're talking about that are income challenged for sure. The relief program is whatever your state happens to set up if there's a disaster, so they can vary. Ours had a maximum of $200,000. I got $150,000. I don't know how they, but that's all I got. Donations are a great thing to take advantage of. As was mentioned, people are very, very charitable when these events happen, and there are a tremendous amount of people who want to donate their time and help do things. I had a church group from Virginia who just showed up at my house and said, we'll clean out your basement for you, and they did, and it was tremendous. And then the 203K program can be the balance, and also, of course, if you have existing mortgage, you may need to pay that off with the 203K program, but you can. They do that, and it really worked pretty well, I have to say. Now, unanticipated consequences. So we've talked about mitigation a lot this week, but there are some impacts to mitigation. Not such that you shouldn't do with mitigation, but there are things that can affect you and your communities that you need to be cognizant of and be prepared to deal with. This is an elevated house. Okay, so you can see it's on a very large foundation. But look at the stairway. Look at the stairs to get into the house. It's more than 20 steps to get into that house. So if this house was owned by maybe someone elderly, someone not in very good physical condition, that becomes a real challenge that's now the way they have to get in and out of their house. Imagine coming home with a lot of grocery bags, which I do all the time. That's a real challenge. So it becomes problematic to elevate houses for people, maybe not disabled fully, but aren't necessarily fit enough to deal with that on a everyday basis. So it becomes a significant challenge. Another example of a house with a complex stair system. One of the reasons for this, and I'll go back to the other one, you can see that this house has very little front setback from the road. Most of these are single-family houses on small lots that don't have a lot of front setback, so there's very little room to fit a stairway in. So this one you can see kind of wraps around the house in a way, so you have to make a couple of turns to just get into your front door. So it's a real challenge. Now, where this becomes another challenge is, think about your emergency medical services. Okay, where we are, almost all of our emergency services are volunteer. And they're tremendous, they're very well trained, they're very well supplied with all of the latest and greatest equipment. But imagine trying to get somebody out of that house on a stretcher who's maybe having a heart attack, a stroke, maybe has fallen, has a significant injury. Navigating those stairs with somebody who might be very heavy can be a real challenge. So it's had an effect on our emergency medical services because sometimes they show up at a house, when they realize it's one of these, they have to call for assistance. And oftentimes now the police and fire department get called just to help lift somebody out of a house. So it's a significant challenge. The other challenge that was presented is an impact on fire services in general. Because these streets are very narrow, these are very highly dense neighborhoods, narrow streets, most rely heavily on street parking. The fire department realized after many of these houses, imagine blocks and blocks of houses now that have been elevated to where they used to be 25 to 28 feet off the ground. Now they're 45 feet off the ground. They said, well, we need to get ladder trucks in there now if there's ever a fire. We can't deal with a structure that tall without a ladder. Okay, so they tried to get their ladder trucks into the neighborhoods. They don't fit, okay? Because the streets are narrow, a lot of parking. They can't make most of the corners in these neighborhoods. So what did we have to do? We had to go out and find and buy a smaller ladder truck. Okay, they exist. You can get them. They're great. Ours is about to be delivered. But again, it's a financial impact on your community that maybe you don't think about. But when you get lots of houses changing radically, you can see that it's something you have to deal with. So if you ever start doing a lot of elevations, just think about the other impacts they have on your community. Like, for example, and the other one, by the way, is just aesthetics. Okay? It's really hard to make a house look nice when it's on a 12-foot foundation. There's a lot of challenges with that. Architects are now going to be challenged to come up with a way to do that in a way that, you know, creates a nice ambiance in a neighborhood. Right now, a lot of the houses are almost freakish looking because they're out of proportion. The foundation is bigger than the rest of the house in many cases. So you can see that that's a real challenge, and something from a design standpoint maybe you need to consider if you start doing a lot of elevation work. So I'll wrap up now, but the point is that use as many tools as possible to help people finance and recover, okay? And I use the 203K program because it's very, very flexible. It's relatively easy to negotiate if you get people who are experienced with it, and it's a great resource for your residents. And again, it doesn't even have to be a disaster-related opportunity. It could be something significantly wrong with the house, like the need for handicap access, for example, and you can use that program to finance those things. So again, it takes putting together a lot of puzzle pieces, and it takes a lot of perseverance. So again, in my case, 26 months after Hurricane Sandy, that's my house. But it took a long time. It took a lot of hard work, a lot of frustration. Being displaced for 26 months is not great for a family, but that's what you have to deal with. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you.